Good morning, everybody. This is Dana B. and Charlie M. with our special guest, Larry Johnson, the Liberty Man. And as you all know, Mountain Patriots Educational Ministries has been around for the last 4 years, and we wanted to make sure that not only are people taken care of, but we wanted to make sure that this was an educational ministry so that people could learn a lot more about our country. Now, as you can see on my screen, it says Mountain Patriots Educational Ministries Historical Podcasts. We want to make America patriotic again. And we're looking for folks like we have today, our great friend, Larry Johnson, as you all might know him, the Liberty Man. We had him on for episode 1, and this is episode 2. And we're also looking for folks that can portray some of the people that Larry has been talking about. So here's the chance for some others to jump on our show, either in period costume or not period costume, and be a part of history. So we need children, moms, dads, teachers, business owners, history buffs to help us celebrate the 250th anniversary of this incredible country. We have a phenomenal history. And the problem that we see is that most people aren't taught where we came from, the sacrifices that were made. And in the last episode, in our episode 1, we had Larry, our buddy, the Liberty Man, talk to us about the glorious cause. A lot of people know this as the Revolutionary War. It was never called that. It was called the glorious cause. And I want you to go back and take a look at episode 1. But here's our opportunity today with Larry to be able to put this down in a documentary style so that we can carry this forward, not just for his family and his legacy, but also for so many Americans to understand where we came from and how incredibly important saving this nation is. So we're going to talk to Larry today about how all of this started, and we're going to take you through this over the next couple weeks and show you exactly who we are, where we're coming from, and hopefully where we're going. And we want this to go into posterity. So without anything further from me, I'm going to turn it over to our great friend and our co-chair, Charlie Markert, who is our question and answer guy, and he's going to talk to a gentleman who came all the way back 250 years to talk with us. So, Charlie, thank you for doing this, and thank you, Larry, for being here this morning. And let's have some fun and show people how great America is.
Amen
No,
to
thank you,
that.
Dana. Thank you. What we want to really do is show you us having a conversation about this topic. So it's not a formal documentary, but it is a documentary and documenting um, our conversation of the moment. And Liberty Man, you have an amazing um, take on history because you look at this experiment in self-governance and how we got there from the eyes of a soldier, from the eyes of the people back then that were involved in this. So um, we'd love to hear and learn more so we can share this as well. And in this episode, we want to talk about the weapons, the horses, the muskets, the transportation, the food, the possibilities bag, the variety of things that the soldier might have. Um, Probably one soldier didn't have all of the things, but some of them. Um, if you'd tell us um, what your great grandfather took to war, what you suppose he took to war, to tell us what it was like when he went off to fight, what he went to fight with.
Okay. Um, I'll be pleased to do that, and I'm honored that you would have me back for a second session. And I hope that hope we all can learn something. Each time I do a presentation, um, I learn something new because there's so much that is not written by university professors and textbooks, and I did read a lot of those textbooks when I was a student at University of North Carolina and had good professors. But you can't put everything about the war into a textbook. They're just too much. And then, of course, my emphasis over the past several years has been the common soldier. That common soldier could well be a continental soldier, or he could be a militiaman. And so we're talking about now focusing on my family and the families of Johnston County, and how they fought, how they entered into the war. And most of the boys in Johnston County, North Carolina, did not join the Continental Forces until much, much later. And the majority of the boys did not join the Continental Forces at all. I mean, yeah, the Continental Forces, they remained militiamen,
Hmm.
and because they had farms to run, they had they had crops to grow, they had all sorts of stuff. But this was a part, in my opinion, as important as carrying a weapon into battle, because soldiers have to eat. Uh, Wars are won based on what a soldier is able to eat and his stomach. They march on their stomachs and win wars on their stomachs. A hungry soldier, it's difficult to get the best from a soldier when the soldier is hungry. So those that stayed at home and did those things, I think, contributed just as much to the war as my family. Many of the men who went to war and fought. Uh, the ones that went to war were younger. The average age of Washington's army, I don't think there's any statistics on the militia, but the average age of Washington's soldiery, as he called them, soldieries, at Valley Forge, because statistics were kept, rolls were kept, ages of soldiers were recorded, and we know that of the 11,000 men that of Washington's army that marched into Valley Forge, the average age was between 12 and 16. 75% of his army was of that age. And of course, this is one reason that the British did not leave Philadelphia in the middle of the winter, because Washington went into Valley Forge on the 18th, 19th of December, about the time the snows began, and started to turn cold. Very cold there for a while, where there were no tents, no huts. They had some tents, but not enough for 11,000 soldiers. And so Washington decreed that the men would begin cutting the wood and building huts. And those huts were not the largest in the world. They were you had to get about 12 men in a space of about 8 feet by 17 feet, and that's where you lived. That's where you stayed away from the cold. And so the soldiery began to build those buildings, and it was literally the building of a small town. 11,000 plus soldiers had to have some place to live. We're not here today to talk about Valley Forge, but the important thing is that's where
Well, Larry,
the
you were talking about food, and wasn't there some issue with the Quakers? I mean, for them to get their food, it's an amazing possibility. It's an amazing challenge to feed that many people.
well, it is always an amazing challenge to feed that many soldiers or people, and so when they went in, they weren't carrying much food with them, and of course that would be that would be consumed fairly quickly, and the soldiers they our soldiers were living off the land. They did not have ships parked out in a
Hmm.
bay, loaded with food to be brought on board to feed their men, such as as the British had, and so they had to bargain with the local farmers for grain and meat, and the local farmers did not want to sell because we had no money to pay them. But Washington decreed that there would be no taking of food, confiscation of a farmer's livestock as food, and we would give them, scrip, to be paid later, which was problematic because many of the farmers didn't think that the war was going to be won by the Americans, and so therefore they would never be paid. So that's a part of the story that
And and
begins
and
to
the
un,
and the
begins to
British
unfold.
didn't
Pardon?
and the British didn't hesitate to take all of the meat that you would find on a farm.
Well, yeah, and the British would take it, but they had money to pay for it. So the
Ah,
farmers were more
okay.
would likely desire to sell. They would sell to the British where they would not sell to the Continental Forces. And of course we may have mentioned this in the last presentation, but Washington moved into Valley Forge. There was nothing there. Valley Forge. There had been a forge there many years before. That's where it got its name. But he moved into Valley Forge about 20 miles away from the British who had taken Philadelphia. And so the British really and truly could have gone across the river and have defeated Washington very quickly. And the British had good spies. And the spies, of course, basically were the farmers who would peep and look, and certainly you could pay the farmers for information, and therefore it was not a pretty sight to see a group of 11,000 men who were starving to death with the barns of the Quakers, for example, bursting with grain, and their barns were filled with cattle, but they would not sell to the army. And somewhere along the way, Washington, being a praying man, would go into the woods and say his prayers privately. I think that's a very important part when we go to cover Washington's spirituality. I think that's an important part. Washington was a very private man in his worshiping. And so he would go into the woods, the snow, and you've seen pictures of Washington kneeling. And there is one sketch showing Washington kneeling, and someone is in the woods. The artist placed a person in the woods peeping at him praying, and that man, his name we think was David Potts, who was a Quaker that lived in the area, and he returned home, and he said, when I go into the woods and see what's going on, I find this general out in the woods by himself praying. So he's a very Christian man. And so that broke the log jam, if we can say that, or we call it the grain jam, where they began to sell and provide Valley Forge soldiers with grain. But that took until about February, and by that time we had lost 2,000 men through starvation, disease, frostbite, and so Washington began to guard the boundaries, would not allow spies to come peeping because he knew what they were doing. They would be reporting to the British, and they would count the number of graves being dug, and that would be an indication as to how many troops Washington might have that could fight, still living. And the truth of the matter is 2,500, we know 2,500 men died, and there was another 4,000 that were unfit for service. So what did that leave? That left about 4,500 men that could have mustered and been able to fight. And of course, the other thing was we had no clothing, freezing to death. Men's feet were bare. They had, even though they may have gone to war with a pair of shoes, such as this. This is a pair of shoes that is what a soldier, when he left home, he may have had a pair of shoes.
May.
But within 6 months, the shoes wear out and they're no good. You have to have leather to fix them. You have to have cobblers to do that. And it's interesting today when we look at a pair of shoes like this, we see brass.
Mm-hmm.
The brass would be taken off and melted down for musket balls, and the shoes would be thrown away. And I'm always amused when I speak to people and I'll say, how's this shoe different from what we wear today? And people look at it and they look at it and they look at it, and maybe someone will say, there is no left and no right. And back in those days, you did not have a left and right shoe. That made it easy for you to switch shoes. If your heels started wearing out, you just switch them over and wear them out on the other side. An interesting thing that over the years, the shoe manufacturers have started making left and right. I think that's a Madison Avenue idea to sell more shoes. So what did we end up with? If they could find leather, they could find deer, they could tan the leather, and they could make moccasins. But there was not enough leather, and it takes time to tan skin to make shoes. So the men would have to wrap their feet in rags if they had them, and many did not. They were just barefoot. They marched in the ice and the snow. And as a matter of fact, Washington, on his way to Valley Forge, he made a comment. He wrote it down. I've got it recorded on a little booklet that I've written here, is that he says, be no problem for the British to track us because they could follow the blood shed from the feet of my soldiers into Valley Forge. But they didn't seek to follow them. They just let them go with the idea that they would eventually die.
Larry, this is heart-wrenching.
Yes.
When you think about the sacrifice that people put their whole family and these guys out there, and if you're picturing this, the sacrifice that went with all of this to get where we are today, people do not appreciate all the effort and energy and time and faith, I'll say faith, that they had in wanting to fight for this freedom, this glorious cause. This blows me away. It's unbelievable.
What I'd like to talk about is a little bit about swords and muskets and horses. When a soldier went off to war, the family had a musket for hunting. They had a horse for plowing. They had they obviously probably didn't have any swords. How did that all come about?
Well, the thing that encouraged the boys, the families to give up their farm tools. They would give up the farm tools such as this crossblade. This is our family crossblade. I don't know how long it was in the family. You can see it cross cut, and they would give up their tools. There might be hoes. There might be other tools had metal in them, and the boy leaving home would go to the nearest blacksmith and have the metal. It would be melted down and made into a sword. Not a sword like this. This was manufactured by sword folks. And best I can tell, it was probably manufactured in Connecticut by a professional. And but it would look very much like this. It would not have all this gear here on the handle. Would not have anything but probably a wooden handle here. Probably would have the guard here in order to protect the hand. And also, if it got hit, it would not fall out of his hand, but all the swords would have blood trenches. I don't know if you have ever looked at a sword, but in all the swords that I have seen that were used in the American Revolution, they were all slanted. So when you slash, you don't hit and blunt, you hit and slice. And the blood trench here, there is an indentation here in the metal. I wish you could see it. Wish we had close-ups that you could see it. You'd have to see it. The sword blade, and then there is an indentation here called a blood trench. And the reason for that is when you stick it into a person, into their body or flesh, that there is this trench that you can pull it out. And it doesn't get stuck because there is air down beside the sword, and the blood trench here allows you to pull the sword back out.
Wow.
Now that's why on bayonets, when I was in the Marine Corps, you had trenches. Had them on. You probably see some on knives, Bowie knives, and things like that now. But I learned that I learned in the Marine Corps. This is not very pretty, and I've never talked about it with my sons. Probably I could now. They're all 50 years old, 40, 50. But we were taught that when you stuck a bayonet into a person, you're not going to be able most of the time to jerk your bayonet out. So you always leave some ammunition in my day it was an M1, so that you can fire into the body of your enemy that you have inserted a bayonet into, and it will blow the bayonet out.
Wow.
So what happens is the flesh gathers around the blade, and you can't quickly pull it out. Well, this is the same thing with a sword. You stick a sword into if you slash them, you're not inserting it. But if you stick it into them, you've got to have a blood trench. That allows air to go down as a part of the wound, and you can pull that out. Now, I don't know whether the blacksmiths put a blood trench into one. I have never seen a primitive sword made by a blacksmith in North Carolina. They may be there, but I've never seen them.
While we're on weapons, can you tell us a little bit about muskets?
Well, I can tell you about the muskets would be what the family had in the home, and it probably it'd be something they would give up. They would be defenseless, and families usually only had one musket, and they gave that up for the son to take to war. It was, as a matter of fact, they were ordered to. When you volunteer or you are recruited or you are drafted to go, you bring the family musket. And so the family would give their musket up, such as these two here. Now, the musket this is not a weaponry session. I'm not a trained person to do that, but they have two muskets here. One was manufactured in Ireland, and they were manufactured for use by the British, and they are really some kind of great muskets. The other muskets that we had, most of the muskets were manufactured locally. Now, here in this area, and you probably know more about this than I do, is that the Locke family made muskets. And down in the Woodstock area, there were some folks down there a family down there that made muskets. And they could only make one about every, I don't know, it would take about 60 days to make a complete musket. So it wasn't an easy thing to do.
Which family was that, Larry?
I beg your pardon?
What family was that? Because that's historical. That's right here in the Shenandoah Valley. That's in Woodstock.
The reason I know this is I was on the street when I did put a booth up in the old mall long before we started the 250th celebration. I would put a tent up, and families would come by with children.
Mm-hmm.
And a lady came by and wanted to meet me, and she had a little boy, probably 7 years old. And she says, "I want you to meet my son." And his ancestors lived down the street in the Luck House, Lutz, or something like that.
Lutz.
And I really shouldn't get into that kind of thing because I don't know their names for sure. But anyway, he was a gunsmith. And right down in one of those big stone houses is where he made weapons, not far from where Daniel Morgan's place he met with his the Dutch mess, which was friends of his, and they went down, and I probably told stories and got drunk, and they're all buried together in that cemetery down there, and it's now marked by the Sons of the American Revolution, the Dutch mess, right across from where Daniel Morgan is. And so, but there are some names I would have to dig into my thought process to get some names down in the Woodstock area of the gunsmiths, and so they would make them locally. Now in North Carolina, there seemed to be a small colony of gunsmiths down in the Lexington Concord area, right in the center of the state, right above Charlotte, and that's where a lot of muskets were manufactured. Even were still manufacturing through the Revolutionary War because the British did not get there to destroy their little factories.
Hmm.
So that's about all I know about muskets. I do name them in my book that I wrote. I named the parts of them, which is here. And I don't know if this is worth my standing up and
We'll make
bringing a
sure, Larry,
musket.
when we're done all of this, we will make sure that people can have the opportunity to be able to get that book.
Now this manufactured musket here from Ireland weighs, it's pretty heavy. They're supposed to weigh 10 pounds and 9 ounces.
10 pounds 9.
I'll almost guarantee you that it weighs more than that. But this was a musket that was provided me by a person that became very supportive. This thing's not loaded. It's not.
Good thing.
And this musket here is exactly the way this was like a British musket. And it was a cannon, let me tell you. And right here it has Dublin Castle is the name that is stamped on it because the factory was at Dublin Castle, and there is a crown stamped on it, and it has under it GR, Great Britain. And so this was a fine weapon, what the finest made. They started making the, gee whiz, they were in use by the English as early as, I don't know, 1740 maybe. And it had a flange on the end here like this. You probably can't see the flange. You have to take my word for it. Had a flange here, and that's where you put a bayonet on it and twisted it and caught the bayonet. The bayonet has a notch in it. You can catch the bayonet on this little flange here, and when you insert it into a person, the bayonet will come back with you. Now, I do have a bayonet. I didn't bring it today, but you put it on, and those bayonets were bloody. The blade was shaped like a triangle. I don't know if you've ever seen a colonial bayonet, but it's shaped. It has 3 sides on it with a sharp point. And the purpose for having 3 sides on it, I hope everybody's had their lunch, is that when you put that into a person, you twist your weapon to wrap their guts around it. So when you pull the bayonet out, you get a hunk of guts. And
Wow.
that pretty much ensures that your opponent is going to die, if not that day, probably in 3 days. That was about it, because of infection. And so that's the British.
Let's talk about some other things.
We had the musket balls too, Charlie, that go
Well,
into it.
well, now you remember from last time I talked about the parts of the musket. You remember that?
Yeah.
This musket is representative of a lot of things that's in our language. Lock, stock, and barrel.
Yeah,
Your
yeah, that's what I
lock,
wanted to get
your
to.
stock, and
There
your
we
barrel.
go.
You remember my telling you that? Is that we use that now.
Explain that.
Lock,
Explain
stock,
those
and barrel.
sayings. Explain
Pardon?
those sayings, Larry, because that was fascinating to me. The
Do
the
what
different
now?
the sayings like lock, stock, and barrel, where those things came
And
from.
you would, and that's where you got the terminology that we use almost daily.
Right.
Somebody said, you say lock, stock, and barrel, and it came from the Revolutionary War. You'd go to the
That's so cool.
gunsmith, your weapon would be beat up. Say, what do you need? A stock? You need a lock? You need a barrel? You say, I need the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. And so and then of course, another thing is somebody's a flash in the pan, somebody that tries something out, it fails. And this is the pan where you put your powder. And of course, there's a flash hole here. And if you don't do this properly, if you don't do it properly, your hammer comes down and it hits it and it just flashes up. Nothing happens. No spark goes through into the barrel to force this out. So many times, young soldiers, you see a musket, you have to pull it back twice. You load it, and of course, a safety feature is half cocked. And if you happen to pull the trigger by mistake, it just flashes and you don't lose your powder in the barrel. But when you're ready to fight, you pull it all the way back and you fire it. And but if it doesn't fire properly and you get afraid, you fire too quick while you have it half cocked. Don't go off half cocked
I was waiting for
because you will be a flash in the pan. All right, that's enough about that. We need to move on, I'm sure.
Right, right,
But that
right.
is fascinating, Larry. That is really fascinating. Half cocked, lock, stock, and barrel, flash in the pan, all of these sayings that we use today,
Right.
these American sayings that we use today from the glorious cause. This is fascinating.
Well, it's still with us today. And I don't know, Charlie probably wants, he is our director of things here.
Yeah,
And we need to we
I
need to
wanted
move
to
along.
move us along to talk a little bit about what it was like between battles, the daily living of the soldier, their canteen, their food, their grooming. The war is kind of like how I've heard an airline pilot describe the flying. He said hours and hours of boredom punctuated on each end with stark terror. So that's kind of like war. Between battles, you got hours and hours of boredom. What what was life like for the common soldier between battles?
Well, what it was like usually was hurry up and wait, and and of course you can only clean your weapon so much, and it was very difficult to clean the weapon because there was no such thing as adequate oil of any type. But what you would do is you would get the cook to save the fat, and you would oil your weapon with that. Now, this weapon is called the Brown Bess. And that name came with it from the manufacturer in England. Is that it was named Bess somewhere along the way. We think that it was named for Queen Elizabeth, who nicknamed Bess, and it was brown. The weapon was brown because when it was shipped here, it was packed in grease. And if you pack up grease, pig grease, for example, and it goes for a long time, it begins to rot and turn brown, and it would make the weapon wood would be, when you took it out of the box it was in, it would be packed in grease and be packed in other things that they could have, such as, if they had leaves, if they had pine straw. I don't know if they had much pine straw in England, but it would be packed in such a way as to keep it from breaking. But when it got here, all of the grease that was packed around it would have turned the wood brown. So that's where we get brown from. And then, of course, it got nicknamed Bess. And so the soldiers slept with their weapons. And you would say, what's going to happen now? I'm going to be sleeping with Bess. It was sort of a joke, but they slept with their weapons. They slept with Bess. They slept with Brown Bess. Now, some of this, keep in mind, is what should we say? Legend. But the thing is, it had to come from someplace, right?
Yeah, I've heard old Betsy
It
referred
had to come from
to it as
someplace.
a gun. Yeah.
And of course, the difference is the militia carried horns with powder, and they had to be very careful to put just the right amount in there. If you put too much, it blows up, blow your weapon up, blow your head off. And so, however, and that's one reason that the officers like to pack cartridges. They would have the right amount of powder. I'm not an expert on packing cartridges. And if it was being packed like a shotgun, putting pellets in it, you'd go ahead and put pellets in that cartridge. And that avoids you just get the cartridge down into the barrel and just fire it, and it blows out. Now, if you're going to put a ball in it, you got to have the right size ball. Now, here are some balls. Some of these are about 65, 62 here. This is more like what the squirrel hunters use. And then, of course, you had the larger one, probably 75 caliber, like this, that would be fired in these two weapons that I just brought here. And when they hit, they dented up. This one hit something. This one hit something. We don't know what.
What was it made out of, Larry?
Lead. Now here's the thing, is they didn't have enough lead. So when a boy left home, there would be no lead mines for the farm, right? So mom would melt down all of her pewter. She'd take plates, probably spend her whole lifetime getting enough money to have a pewter plate. So the family would melt the plates down and would make balls out of them. They'd have cups, such as this, pewter cup. As a matter of fact, I've got a little liquid in here. I won't say what it is, but we don't want to drink too much at one time. I don't have that much of a cough.
I'll drink to that, Larry.
So the dad would be giving up his tools. Mother would be giving up her appliances to make balls. And of course, the pewter was lighter. So that means the ball would not be as accurate. But if you're within 30 feet, and that's about what they wanted, the distance that you wanted to be when you fired on someone. 30 feet is not very far, is it? 10 steps. And so you see the whites of the eyes, you would fire. And you'd better be accurate. If you're not, especially the British would come chasing you with a bayonet. And that's one thing all men feared, the bayonet. As a matter of fact, the boys at Guilford Courthouse, North Carolina militia on the front line fired, and at Guilford Courthouse and Cowpens, And the North Carolina boys were on the front line of both of those battles, and that's why General Morgan told the boys, "Give me 2 shots, fire twice. That's all I asked for." Now it takes about 12 seconds, 11 to 12 seconds to reload. Now, how close, how far can you go when you're running in 11 seconds? How many? You can run about what, 40
100
steps?
yards?
Huh? 40
100
feet?
yards?
And so you would fire, and if you missed, that soldier would be on you. So you wanted to fire with the soldier, with your enemy further back. And so, but if it were further back and you were firing, you may miss. And so Morgan told the boys, said, now this was the North Carolina militia now for the most part, because the militia would turn and run. If they saw the British and that bayonet coming from them, they would fire and get the heck out of there. They'd run. They'd drop their weapons many times because they could run faster with not carrying a musket. And so Morgan took advantage of their fears and said, "Give me 2 fires, and then you can run like heck and take off." And so the British, when they see these boys running, they think they've got the battle nearly won, and they go charging after them. Now I'm into strategy here, and I'm probably that's another subject for another day. But they go running, and so Morgan put the Virginia Continentals in the line behind the North Carolina militia. And those boys had a lot of experience. They didn't run. And so what happened is the British would think they'd won the day. They'd go charging up the hill. In the meantime, Morgan's rifles would be on both flanks. And as they came, they would be firing as the British ran up. And then suddenly the British would find out that they had run into a trap. It was an entrapment. And the Virginia's boys would be firing here. And then, and this is where Abel was in the horse, is that Morgan Station, this is Cowpens, Morgan Station, 2 companies of cavalry on either end of the battle line. So when the British pulled through, went up the hill, they met the Virginians, and the cavalry came in behind them and whacked them to pieces.
Wow.
Now, that is the strategy that Morgan told General Greene to use, and he did use that at oh gee, come on, Larry,
Battle of Cowpens? At Cowpens?
at North Carolina, at Guilford Courthouse. But
The
it didn't
flag
work.
that's behind you.
Pardon?
Isn't that the flag that's behind you from Guilford Courthouse?
Yeah. This is the Guilford Courthouse flag. This is the flag that was flown by the North Carolina boys. And this here is too big. This is an original. This is not an original, but this is the actual size. It was 103 inches long and 42 inches deep, and had 13 stars with 8 points on it. And they made themselves their own flag. And on some of the sketches you see, I have a sketch. Someone artist did a sketch of that battlefield. That flag is right there with the North Carolina boys. So anyway, we're sort of off. Probably not what Charlie wanted us to head towards, but the horses.
It'll all come together.
The horses. The horses are what they brought from home, and what they could confiscate or buy from farmers that could be used. The musket balls they made themselves. That's one thing they did in between battles. You want to know what they do? They made balls. If they could get the lead, they would make the balls. And
you mentioned one time about carving a canteen.
I beg your pardon?
They carved their canteens.
Yeah, that was a pastime. Now the British had metal canteens, and a lot of our Continental boys had metal canteens, but they would take a person working in metal, And so this is a wooden canteen here.
Fascinating.
So they would spend most of the time, they left home with a canteen. Canteen would last you about 6 months and it would start falling apart. And so they would spend their time making canteens and trying to seal it with something. There was various little things that they had they could try to seal it with, such as dried molasses, a few things like that. When molasses dries, it gets very, very hard, which molasses was one of the, and we haven't gotten to that yet, but we should, is the menus that the boys had, the food, the kind of food they had. But this was the canteen. And so there was a promise to the boys that they would have, and in my book here, I don't know if I can turn to it, but you were promised a pound of beef a day. You believe this? A pound of beef a day, half, 3/4 pound fish. You were promised, I think it was about a pint of peas. The company got, I think it was supposed to get 100 gallons of molasses a month for the whole company. And you were promised rum. Of course, rum is made out of what? We know what rum is made out of, right? Right? Molasses. You were promised so much, a grog a day. And that was at the end of the day, you were promised. And if you're going into battle, you got rum before the battle, and then you got rum after the battle. You got rum, it would, make you braver, stronger. And then when you came out of the battle, you got more rum. All this is in my little book here called Liberty Man. It's in great detail here. But now, the rations, they didn't get them. We couldn't find the food. Oh, okay, right here. Now, this is for the Continental Forces. 1 pound of beef a day, 3/4 pound of pork, 1 pound of salt fish, 1 pound of bread or flour, 3 pints of peas. You believe that?
Is that
No.
supposed to be per day?
Yeah, you didn't get it.
Wow.
You didn't get it. In
No,
other words,
no.
you were supposed to. Now, on the local news, and this we're moving in, I'm out of my period now. Just this week, the press has been criticizing the Pentagon for buying several millions of dollars of lobster.
Lobster and steak.
Lobster and steak.
Yep.
That
I was just thinking about that.
irritates me so bad that I want to march over to or find those reporters.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
So this is where these are the kinds of things, and they also made wine out of spruce. Now you can't drink that now, right? Because the federal government says that's cancer causing. Don't drink any spruce wine. There's something in that's going to give you cancer. But the men were given all of these things, and of course each company was to receive 3 pounds of candles a month, 24 pounds of soft soap, 8 pounds of hard soap per week, and our government couldn't fulfill this. Now, about grooming, I think that's part of the talk we're making today. About grooming, you had to shave. Washington required you to shave and take a bath every 3 days. You could not grow a beard. You had to wear your hair. This is called a queue, C-U-E, and I think the English have an English spelling on that, but it's a queue. Means a pigtail. They didn't call it pigtail. And I mentioned this before and I'm repeating myself, but this was for sanitary purposes here. Pull your hair back. Your buddy could see the lice, pick lice, and that was a great pastime. You say, what do you do between battles? Well, you can play some cards and pick lice off your buddy.
I wonder if curly Q came from there too,
I
Larry.
beg you, I beg your pardon?
The word, well, you got a curly Q.
Q. What?
You said when they pull their hair back into a ponytail, it was called a Q.
That's a Q.
Okay, so if you had curly hair, would that be a curly Q?
I don't know. It could
But
be.
I mean, you brought to lock, stock, and barrel and so forth.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
just popped into my head.
Yeah. And now, um,
I love it.
say what they do in their pastime. Well, they made musket balls. They would hunt if it was the season, right season of the year. You would go out and you would look for herbs, right? You would look for all sorts of things that would keep you, if you had diarrhea, if you had a fever, uh, you would look for things to season whatever food you had, and you would play cards like this. And also they have some games. Now with kids, when I'm out with kids, this is a game you play, and you see that on a string, you throw it up, and you see if you can get good enough to catch that ball like that. See what? And then of course they love to play draughts. Now, that was the name for what? We'll have a quiz here now. What is the game of draughts? Anybody know?
Beats the heck out of me.
Checkers.
Checkers. All right.
They played a
I
lot of
love it.
checkers or draughts. Play draughts. Then you tried to keep your safe if you had pay chits. This is an actual copy of my Abel's pay chit. This is two pay chits. This is one so you can see both sides. Like that.
Paycheck.
And they were you would when you walk up to the postmaster, there's a table there, and when I was in the Marine Corps, this is still the way we did it. Walk up to a small table, you got your paymaster to the right, you got your banker to the left, you collect that, take one step to the left, get your pay, and they punch a hole in it so it can't be used anymore. And that's where we get the word punch my card or whatever we say about that. This card here, I wish you could see it, but it has
card.
Abel Johnson's signature on the back. So when he cashed it in, he had to sign it.
So how did you get that? How did you find that?
Pardon?
How did
Pardon?
you find that?
North Carolina Library. During that time, paymasters kept exquisite records, believe it or not, better than they do today.
I'm sure.
And they put them in trunks and they carried them around until after the war. And then after the war, Washington ordered them to be sent to certain locations. And finally, they were distributed to the various states. And Abel's numbers of his paychecks he collected, we know about $83 for his 6 years. Now, maybe more. I think there's some other paychecks out there. He may have collected 140 or $50 for his trouble. And if you divide that by 8 years, you can see he didn't get a penny a day. So this is a paycheck. It's got a number on it. This is paycheck number 4437, state of North Carolina. 20, I think it's 29 August 1773. This was his last paycheck given by the auditor. His auditor's headquarters was Wilmington, North Carolina. Abel Johnston, ABELJOHNSTON. And guess the way he signed it? He signed it ABELL Johnson without a T, JOHNSON. And so that's a paycheck. These are the games they played. They had all sorts of things that they could do here.
About the food, tell me about sweet potatoes.
Tell you about what food?
Sweet potatoes?
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting story. The British had gatherers to go out and collect food, but the British were looking primarily for meat, and they would take, I don't know what kind of vegetables they took. I don't think they took any, to tell you the truth. They were looking for meat. And by the time they got through taking all the meat, there was nothing left. One of the things that they would do would be that they would pass over the sweet potato fields. I don't think the Irish potato may have gotten here by that time, but they'd pass over because the British thought sweet potatoes was something that you fed the hogs. They would also pass over the peanut vines because they thought that was hog feed. And so when the British came through, they left all of that, and the American gatherers, especially down south, they would go in and they would pick the sweet potatoes. And Charlie pulled a sweet potato, and
There's a sweet potato.
and they brought
And
ate the
there's
peanuts.
today's peanuts.
They would eat peanuts, Jiffy peanuts, butter. And we all know that those are the two most nutritious vegetables that you can eat. Now, another thing that they didn't eat turnips. The turnips, they just passed over. They thought they were weeds. Well, you pull a turnip up, what do you got on the bottom? You got something that's very nutritious, and you can also eat the greenery along with the turnip. You can eat them raw, as a matter of fact. And so that was the gathering of the food. That was not the ideal food. There was a lot of rice that was eaten because we had the rice down in South Carolina, but it was really hard to get the rice to the right place. But you had to go gather what you could gather, and that's what you ate. And so now, wait a minute, do we have any other thing about in the book here that I've skipped over that might be interesting to use to talk about? I think
Well,
that's,
we'll do herbs and stuff another time, but you told us about um, uh, what when a ship would in the Navy would take over another ship, the
oh
first,
yeah.
would you tell us that little story?
Okay, now this is would be in an herb presentation. Now, when we commandeered an English ship or any kind of ship, didn't make any difference what it was, what country it was. If you got hold of that, is that the after you took the ship, no one was allowed to board the ship until the physician, the company physician, would be the first person that could go in and explore the ship, and that was to find the chest of herbs or medicine. And that was the most valuable thing that you could gather. Sure, yeah, it had a lot of other stuff that was valuable. It had food on it, it would have all sorts of things. But the doctors got the first chance to go in and get the herbs. And that's a presentation for another day. And I've got uh, I've got little samples here of herbs that they used and little books here that to describe how you go about using what flower when for what ailment. Depression, for example, was something you got infections and anyway.
Well, as we wrap this up, what was the morale? What was like? What were the spirits of the fighting men like? And what are they? What are the things that they most complained about? Do you have any idea of that?
Well, I don't know. I don't know personally. I wasn't there,
I don't
but
know either.
it
Neither was I.
yeah, they complain. Our soldiers always complain about the food. They complain about everything, but the thing that they
How could
used
they
to
not?
keep morale up was little things like this. if you could find yourself a pair of glasses and you had bad eyesight, that was one of the greatest blessings you would have. You see these glasses here?
Hmm.
Yep.
I don't know if you maybe a close up, but we call them spectacles
Spectacles.
like that. And this is round. Now, at the beginning of the war, when the Prussians, when the British decided to start using Germans, that was an event. As a matter of fact, Washington wrote about that. As a lot of the officers wrote about that the English are going to bring Germans in to fight. That busted everybody's morale because the Germans were known to be absolutely heartless, just terrible. And so Israel Putnam, the oldest general in Washington's army, he hated the Haitians, hated them with a passion. And so a lot of the boys would go in. You know, if you killed a Haitian, you wanted his glasses because they were well made in Germany and they
Sure.
were round. Now that caused great confusion for Israel Putnam's soldiers because if you saw a spy come into your camp and they had round glasses on, they would be shot immediately because these were made in Germany, and the chance of that man, he would be lying if he said he was anything but a German.
Wow.
So the Putnam wanted all his men, if you're going to get glasses, now you can't see this. I wish you could. But these are oblong. These are American glasses. See?
Yep.
He wouldn't
Right.
even wear a pair of German glasses. Even, well into the war when you couldn't just shoot somebody because some of your own men might have confiscated a set of round glasses from a dead German.
Huh.
And so, but those were some of the things that you don't read about in a history book. And
No.
I don't know why not, but they're not in there.
That's why
And
we're doing this.
I beg pardon?
That's why we're doing this, because
Yeah.
it's not,
And
this is,
of course, another
nobody
thing
has.
is this. Uh, uh, you had in your outline about ranks and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
How do you tell rank? Well, the soldiers in the Continental Forces, you could tell ranks. But in the militia, you could not because no one had a uniform, no one had any identification. So, I don't know if you see this or not. These are feathers. Feathers became very important because feathers and the length of your feather would give some indication as to your rank. You'd be identified, you see, that way. You'd put a certain feather in, and you would determine that in your own company. Now, if you couldn't get hold of feathers, you would cut a branch or something off of a bush or a tree, a twig, for example, and you would put into your hat, and that would be indicative of your rank and and but Washington found out that the common soldier liked to wear twigs in their hats. I don't but you get bored in the army, right?
Yep.
And so many of the common soldiers that had no uniform or or ragged uniforms, Washington didn't say anything about them wearing a twig in their hat. And as a matter of fact, that became a symbol, became something of honor to wear a twig. And Washington soldiers that had the twigs were the ones that usually didn't have uniforms. They were militia, and they were made fun of when they. As a matter of fact, there's a story about our guys. Washington, after we took Boston, Washington lined up his troops, lined them all up, and he put the best dressed ones in the front, and he put the boys would no uniforms or ragged uniforms in the middle. And he told them to wear twigs. And then he put his second best dress in the rear. And so when the boys came marching through Boston, the ladies up on their balcony, for example, started jeering the soldiers that were in the middle because they were ragged, they stunk, they just, pointing fingers at them. And look at them wearing those little old twigs. Washington went over and picked a twig, and he put it in his tricorn and wore a twig. Now, some legend says that he wore a twig for the rest of the army to be in identity with the poorest dressed, least equipped soldiers. When the Boy Scouts, I don't know who did this, maybe Norman Rockwell did a painting. He did one every year for the Boy Scouts. He did a painting of Washington standing behind some boys dressed in Boy Scout uniforms. And Washington is pointing to the future. And he has his hand out around these boys. It's a famous painting. And in his tricorn, the artist put a twig. That's classic. That's a classic picture.
Cool.
So anyway, when I was president of the SAR,
it's incredible.
I told the story, and some of the men, we need to raise some money. We needed some money. When I got started with the SAR, there was no money. Couldn't buy anything. So I said, well, let's go to Walmart and stand outside with a, the hat, a cup, and have our uniforms on. And one of the men who passed away a few years ago, he says he knew the story of the twig. He wrote the story of the twig down, and he broke twigs off, and we all wore twigs and passed out that brochure that this is how the poorest soldier of the Revolutionary War dressed. And guess what? People would walk away, go to their car, read the brochure, turn around and come back and give us money.
Incredible. Because
they wanted to identify with the poorest soldiers. And so anyway, I don't know. I'm looking at my giddy up here, and but the whistle,
Dana, time-wise,
the whistle became the way you could manage your troops, because Washington ordered there would be no brass bugles. They would be melted down into musket balls, and we would manage our troops with whistle signals. And don't have time to go into it and teach you the signals here, but 3 shorts means something, 1 long, 3 shorts, 1 continuous long, and that's how you can manage it. There was a command for every single thing that a soldier did on the battlefield with the whistle, except one thing. An officer had to say and shout out loud, "Commence firing." That was not ordered by a whistle. Retreat was ordered, stop was ordered, reload was ordered, but fire had to be from the throat of one of the officers. Okay. So there's your whistle. The trumpets were melted down, made into musket balls, and they carved the whistle out of some branch off of a tree.
Larry, as we wrap this up, do you have any final thoughts about the common soldier that was fighting for the glorious cause?
Yes, I do.
With the audience, and then we'll wrap this up.
One final thing. The first order that Washington, when he was made commanding general, the first order he wrote, and I can get my research that I did many years ago out. He got in touch. He wrote to the Continental Congress, and he says, "I want to hire," and he gave a number, "chaplains for every regiment." And they said, "Well, that's why you need to be hiring soldiers." No. The first order that Washington, the first thing he requested from the Continental Congress was permission to fund and pay chaplains. no regiment, no company, no platoon would go into battle without a chaplain. And further, this is a subject, a bigger subject.
It is. It is.
Yeah, we
It's a
want to
bigger
cover that as
subject
well.
that he ordered. He ordered daily prayers. He ordered communion on Sunday. Another subject, but that is not published anywhere that I know of, except I got a copy of all of his orders. And you can go through the book at the beginning of the book, the beginning of the orders, and you find that he said that he was able to send chaplains in, and chaplains had the highest casualty rate of any group of soldiers. The percentage of chaplains that died out of the 25,000 men, soldiers that died, the highest percentage came from the ranks of the chaplains, because the British knew that would build morale, and if you kill the chaplain, it would lower morale.
Oh.
Gentlemen, it's been good to be with you. I don't know how long we've gone here, but
I
I've
think,
enjoyed what I've
Larry, we
been
have
doing.
enjoyed this so much. Learning more about it, feeling like we've been there because you've described it so beautifully. We appreciate your time, and thank you for your service, both in being Larry, the Liberty Man, but your time in the Marine Corps and serving our nation. Dana,
Absolutely. And I want to
God
add
bless
something
you,
to this.
and God bless the Mountain Patriots.
I would love to add something to this because I want people to know that this is more than anything that you will ever learn in school. And I hope that we're beginning to bring an understanding to people here in America of how incredible this country is. And I'm going to recap just a couple things that Larry said. Abel Johnson, less than a penny a day, and he didn't do it for the money. Nobody did anything for the money. They had no shoes, they had no pay. Their families donated almost everything they had by the grace of God for the glorious cause. And that is a cost of freedom. And when Larry also explained about, I guess I want to call that an executive order from George Washington, that every group had its own chaplain. That to
Right.
me says that we are one nation under God. And what
Amen.
I see and what I hope all you are getting this out of this today is we have got to stand up for the greatest country in the world. And look what's happened throughout history for our life, our liberty, and our pursuit of happiness, just to have and be able to enjoy the freedoms that we have today. So I sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank Charlie for putting the questions together. Most importantly, I want to thank Larry for taking all this time with us. And please, like what you see, share it with people, let them know what's going on, and let's bring this country back to one nation under God. And
Amen.
I'm going to stop right there. And
That
Charlie, should we do our Mountain Patriots prayer today? Larry, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, the final thought is I congratulate Mountain Patriots for what they're doing, and I wore a hunting shirt for a special purpose. I wanted to talk about the dress of the warrior. That'll have to be next time.
we'll
We're going
do
to have a
that
lot
another
of
time.
these. The
Yes.
Pardon?
more that we talk to Larry, the more we're learning that we want to learn more.
Well, you'll like the story of the hunting shirt and George Washington and Daniel Morgan. You'll just love that.
We'll do that.
Absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
Do you have, will you give us the Mountain Patriot prayer, Dana?
I certainly will. I want to thank everybody again for taking the time to watch this. And please share this. Just like it because it helps with the algorithms and it'll get this out a lot farther to a lot more people. But we have what's called the Mountain Patriot Prayer, and it was written by Charlie for the Mountain Patriot. So let us pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this beautiful world and the country that you have given us and the patriots who are willing to care for it. Thank you for your inspiring our founders to create this beautiful republic. And please Help us to keep it as the inspiring place to live. Please give us the wisdom to do the right things, the common sense to judge wisely, the energy to never give up, and in your unending grace, in which we take comfort, Jesus, in your name we pray. Amen.
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 And as we say at the end of every Mountain Patriots episode on anything we do, this is another one
In the book.
that is in the book. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I want you to have a blessed afternoon. God
Amen.
bless.
God bless.